Hey, Screamers, we have something special for you today. Earlier this week, the Fort Worth Film Club screened Melvin Van Peebles' scathing look at white privilege, 1970s Watermelon Man. At our post-screening discussion, we were lucky enough to be joined by very special, actually beyond special guests, Mr. Marcellis Perkins and Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr. It was a rich, engaging, informative, and candid discussion, and we are pleased to present that live recording here. Next episode, we'll be back to wrap up our discussion on Hal Hartley, as well as some new films and general musings. But for now, enjoy this live conversation on Watermelon Man with Marcellis and Dr.G. Did you want to?
No, I was just going to ask them to introduce themselves.
Yeah, well, before that, so thanks everybody for being here again, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And so, yeah, take it away. Tell us who you are. It's existential pop quiz.
Sure. Marcellis Perkins, third-ish doctoral student at TCU in the higher education department. I work in the office of the chancellor and the president, but outside of work titles, I'm a brother, son, community member from Hampton Roads community in Virginia. Did my undergrad at the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Mass. Completed my master's at TCU and now working on a doctoral program. Outside of school, really like being in the community. Foodie, amateur, plant person, and doing cool things like this. So,
awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Oh,
can't step on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Informal but serious.
Hey man, as y'all can see, I'm the DJ. He's the rapper. You know what I'm saying? So, but it's a pleasure and a privilege still to be here. As far as what's relevant here, my name is Frederick Gooding Jr. You can call me Dr. G. I'm indeed the captain of my ship and the master of my destiny. And what can I tell you is except I love movies 100%. Write about them, read about them, talk about them all the time. And so a sister was coming in here, just heard me talk about Empire Strikes Back. 100%. I don't know what the hell they are doing now, right? But that's another topic for another time. But yeah, so I love movies. That's why I'm glad to be here in this space. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you again, both of you, for being here. So on that note, I'd like to start with this question to both of you. Film on some level is a universal language, but also it's kind of not at all. And so with that in mind, could you guys talk a little bit about how film helps not only to create shared stories, but also to create mythologies? And I'm thinking also in terms of the unholy trinity from Dr. G's Black Oscars book as well.
Oh, he's throwing out. He's kissing up right off.
Oh, man.
I'm so sorry.
No.
But you're like half impressed.
I was just trying to masquerade and just be a part of the conversation. But okay, so if I must reveal, I do teach about movies, and I've written about it a little bit. And I think Brock's point is excellent in that. What's fascinating? I don't know if anyone's been outside the country. Have you been to the movie theater?
Yes.
Which movies are being shown? Movies made from Hollywood, right? It's fascinating because all I'm saying is this. Not that there aren't excellent foreign movies made, but I'm not going to find them at the AMC 18 down the street, right? Right? And so what's so fascinating is I've been to countries whereby there are only Hollywood movies shown in foreign establishments. I'm talking about far away from Czech Republic to Vietnam to Australia. Hollywood movies dominate. And so going back to your point, Brock, I think many people say, right, especially my students, oh, but it's just a movie, don't worry about it. Actually, it's the opposite. Movies are indeed this universal language that communicates so much to so many people. And so even though you haven't set foot maybe in the Czech Republic, somebody over there thinks they have an idea as to what life might be like for you as an average American. For anyone who's gone abroad, here you are scraping for, months, right? Cutting the crust in your bread and everything so you can save up for your ticket. You go over there and they think you're rich, right? Because that's the narrative that they see, right? So that's just a generic piece. But when it comes to race, right, that is a whole nother ball of wax as far as what people interpret. But I think just, in terms of us just starting off, I think movies are indeed a universal language, and for anyone who has the ability to see, so much is encapsulated in the moving picture. After all, if they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, my question is, well, how much is a moving picture worth?
Oh, yeah. Retweet. No, I thought that was an excellent point. When I think about movies and I think about art in general, art really allows us to, one, express our viewpoints of society, but also what are the pitfalls or what are the ills of society and how can art help elevate that? And I think the power of movie is that we get a lot of different aspects of art, the storytelling, the artistic interpretation, the vibrant colors, the interactions, the human interactions, the creative human interaction, or the things that we create out of our imaginations, but still have some type of reality at the undergirding of it underneath. So as Dr. G said, I think movies say a lot. And I think conversations like this allow us to explore what is exactly being said, but also what is not being said. What are the silent parts of the movie that we're missing?
Yeah, and just real quick to build on what the brother just said, think about how movies about Vietnam weren't made in the 1940s. Right? When were they made? In the 80s, Hamburger Hill, and right. So in other words, movies do reflect and reinforce aspects of our daily life, right? In many ways. Not to say that they are dispositive and they are definitive in terms of what is actually happening, but they do reflect. There's this tension, there's this relationship, and so to the extent that movies are coming out now, 50 years from now, movies can be an excellent time capsule as to some of the issues and things that were going on. Just with the passing of a COVID mask and and a couple of the newer movies now, that we might take for granted because we've been a part of this experience. But just like your parents or your grandparents might whip out and dust off the VHS tapes. If you don't know, they're these rectangular box square thing. Okay, right. Just like they might dust those off and say, hey, check this out, because this was formative in terms of the impression it made them, or that shared language, expressions. The idea is that movies reflect and reinforce so much. And so even though we oftentimes say it's just a movie, it can mean so much more. And especially when we actually start to parse out, say in a movie like this, issues and themes reflected to us in terms of gender, gender roles, and obviously, race, and just capitalism, or just, some of these larger ideas as far as how we operate. I think movies oftentimes are an overlooked source of good information.
And just to kind of jump on both of those things, movies and art in general will teach us lessons, or ways to live for good and bad. And we bring our own sort of experiences then to bear on those as well, which can reinforce or teach something new or lead us down just a terrible, shitty path. Right?
So I have a question in regards to Melvin Van Peebles, and so where do you see him as a historian in a study of film? Where do you see him in the pantheon of not only black filmmakers but American filmmakers?
Well, what I really like about Melvin is the whole enterprise behind the movie we saw today speaks rebel. Right? It speaks counterculture, and I think that it resonates with many people. Just when you just gave the little preamble about just how the studio gave him certain restrictions, and so him saying that, what, I'm not going to be bound by that. I'm still going to make the movie on my terms. Right? It takes a lot of temerity. It takes a lot of strength of character to have a vision and to be able to pursue it and see it through. And so I think, again, we could talk about content and whether you liked it or not, But just in terms of what he represents somebody who is not going to go with the status quo. And he took many risks as a result, and paid the price as a result. But I think that you cannot say that he was simply playing the university. University. Whoops, my Freudian slip. But he was not playing the corporate line here when he was producing this craft. And even from what I understand, I don't know a whole lot, but he had back and forth with the author of the screenplay in terms of the author of the screenplay wanted things one way and he wanted things another way. So just this idea of him just being a true artiste, I think is an inspiration, for many of us who oftentimes feel constricted by rules and people telling us, what we should be thinking, what we should be doing.
Just a bit off that too. One of the things that I came across in his interviews was that he had told Columbia that he had two endings, right? And so one of the endings was that the main character wakes up and it was all a dream, it was a nightmare, and he returns back to the safety of his whiteness. But he told them I forgot to record that part, and he told them after they tore down the whole set that it was only actually one ending that he's ever going to record. And I think that says a lot to, one, this idea of being a rebel, but two, as a black artist, the thin line that you have to also balance between staying true to your art, but also having to appease this larger structure. Like, he's an indie artist who, going to Columbia, which is a major film network. And so how do I give you what you want, but also stay true to me? But in that, he played the game of this nuanced trickster of, I was always going to, I know your hand, you don't know my hand. So how do I play the game to my end, to meet my ends at the end of the day? So I think he sets this precedent for black artists and black directors that there are ways if you are able to maneuver them. It is a very, very tough path that he does, and I don't know how many directors follow him are able to successfully do that, to trick the system to make the movie in your own mind, without losing sight of what it is that you want. So he's high on my list after watching this type of film, and just kind of knowing those backstories, I think really give more context to the actual art.
And this brother just inspired me because isn't that part of the point, right? That we wake up, we typically have to go somewhere, we have to do something, we're responsible for fill in the blank. And many of us, right, may feel powerless to some degree, right? When you look at the larger economy of scale, when we see these numbers that the Jeff Bezos of the world are making, it's oh my God, am I ever going to be successful? That sort of deal, right? And sometimes we might feel swallowed up whole. I think what Brother Perkins is saying, is that artists like Melvin Van Peebles reminds us that we may not have all the power, but we do have power. There's always an opportunity to subvert, to resist, to think critically, to think differently. There's always that opportunity to do so, even though ultimately Columbia Pictures has the last laugh, and right, they're the system, the House wins, we get it. But there's always something that you can do, right? And I think in terms of artistry, that's one of the reasons why so many of us, I think, pay so much homage and respect to artists that inspire us, because they had to, at some point, take some sort of risk, be vulnerable, and I think we appreciate them for doing so.
Yeah, just anecdotally, for those who don't know, the original story was kind of an Ebenezer Scrooge story where it was all a dream, and there was kind of a white savior, liberal guilt released, where he realizes all of his errors of his ways. What's great for me about this story, especially from a Melvin perspective, is that off of the success of this movie, he was offered a 3-picture deal and basically said, "Nah, I'm good," and went on to make Sweetback, for $150,000, and it grossed $15 million, and it's just blazing a path. Is just, what he was able to do with his first 3 films is just incredible. In regards to where do you think that line is? Because we were talking before, Brock and I were talking before the show. If you look at how successful Watermelon Man is, to me, it's kind of inscrutable that it actually was well received and it made money, especially because wasn't around, but I don't believe that white privilege and satire about white liberalism was really being talked about then. If you look at something like The Spook Who Sat by the Door, which came out in '73, also a major studio release, and essentially as soon as it got into the theaters, it was pulled after the studio realized, the story that was being told. How do you think Melvin was able to navigate those waters like that?
Well, I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier in the kind of talking about how the execs were kind of asking, some of the black people working, like, how do you feel about this film? And him catching wind of it and like, well, tell them it's great. Tell them this is what black people actually want to see. And I think that goes again to this idea of the rebel, this being very in tune with the art that he wants, but also knowing the system that he's up against. And so once it's on the screen and then the acclaim starts to come and people are saying, oh, we do like that art, it's kind of you take a deep breath, but will it resonate the way that you want, right? And while I'm watching this film, I think a lot about things that Dave Chappelle said in his work, where, you kind of see some of the similarities, like, are you laughing at it? Are you laughing with me? And I think that's the difficult part when you do take that type of risk with these type of artworks that Van Peebles is doing, is that will it resonate? Will it land the way it is intended to? Will people actually get the messaging, or they get the subtle jokes? Will they kind of lose themselves on the absurd jokes? But in that thin line, did you get the actual message that's being said?
Well, if that's the alley, here's the oop. So again, I think what we can allow ourselves to do is be complicated. Pardon the expression, it doesn't have to be all black and white. Right? There's some shades of gray. For some of us, it's 50. Okay. Okay. I was making a movie joke. We put the brown in there. Okay. But it was a movie joke. Yeah. 50 shades. Okay. At any rate, for the Dakota fans out there with their press tour, that's another disaster. But
she's so much fun, though.
She's fun, but the press tour is a disaster. So just like that, just like we can say we love Dakota, but her press tour is a disaster. Love Melvin Van Peebles, what he stands for, but not to quote David Allen Greer and Damon Wayans, but hated it. Sorry, y'all. I mean, I wasn't feeling it. I mean, it was difficult for me. I mean, again, there were parts, right? There were parts. For example, I think for me, probably the most compelling part was when he was saying, I don't know if y'all caught the language there, but I think the script writing was clever there when he was like, oh, it's just a nightmare. It's just a nightmare. Like, it's almost like the nightmare would have been better than the reality of waking up black. So I thought that was clever. That was good. But just the overall premise, like Perkins was saying, it's a tough line, right, with satire, and at least with me, it didn't land, right? And I know it's a different time and we're looking back at it, but even still, this just really smacks of the Black Like Me or the Soul Man in '86, or even LaQuisha that came out in 2019, right? This idea of that, you change the color of the race, and at least in a comedic aspect, that's the issue I have, right? Because we're taking the time on a Wednesday night to sit down, process, and think, et cetera, which I think is absolutely awesome, and I'm appreciative of you all creating this space and you all staying to actually have this conversation. But my concern is that for most of the audience who walk in with certain ideas and concepts, they pretty much walk out with many of those concepts undergirded and affirmed, right? Particularly when the color piece is on on a comedy level, right? So the first time that we see his blackness is when he's showing his arse, right? Or his butt cheeks, right? So I think that right there, for me, is setting the tone in terms of how we're supposed to take in, his new identity. And also, I don't, we could go into it later. I don't know if I truly, in watching the film, felt that Gerber, as a black person, truly navigated and experienced the pain of what it is to be a black person. And I don't know how you go about showing that and demonstrating that in a comedy, and the brief amount of time that you have. I mean, we've been paying this tax all of our life, and it's not a joke, right? Ha ha he he. But what happens when I get in my car and somebody pulls me over? Is it fucking funny then? Right, I'm on my own then, right? It's not a joke. It's real life. The minute I walk out the door, right? So again, I think it's it's difficult. How do you attempt to satirize, and also who has the ability to satirize, right? Who has the power and control to satirize? I mean, let's be honest, it was written by a white author. I mean, you're talking about the white studio, the pressures. And so I think Melvin had a tricked deck. He did the best he could, and he threw in the black power piece towards the end. It still came off a little uneven. I mean, maybe if he had more time or a series or something, he could have really developed that point in terms of, why does it have to be one thing versus the other in terms of losing the family and the wife and that sort of thing. But, all I have to say, just, on this idea of why I'm so stuck on the humor piece is that I personally have been to Dachau, Germany, right? I've been to Auschwitz, right? And all I'm saying is that, and I'm not trying to, make it real serious, but, I just remember hearing the gasp from the audience when they made that one Jewish joke, right? When the whole fucking movie is about blackness, right? The whole fucking movie is about blackness. And so all I'm saying is this, but I don't have to be Jewish to understand as a human being that what I saw was wrong. Right? As a human being, when I saw the fake shower, when I saw the ovens, as a human being, I don't have to be Jewish to understand that. Right? So all I'm saying is this idea that you have to be black to understand what racial discrimination is, just the very premise, right, is one that I question, right? Because I think for many of us, it is easy to separate it. But for me, what the humor does is often it over-dramatizes and therefore protects the day-to-day normal racism that still goes virtually unchecked, right? Just, even just the premise of, the bus driver in a service position, the elevator person in service position. I mean, just these pieces that we aren't even thinking about. We're just focusing on him and his upper class job and maybe his boss trying to exploit this new market. But just the day-to-day of this idea of who gets to participate in society. I think those are some of the potential pieces that maybe if it was a different lens creating the script that maybe would have been explored. So I'll pause there. I don't want to dominate, but I just wanted to be honest and say that I can enjoy who Melvin Van Peebles is. I can enjoy aspects of the film, but overall say that I wasn't feeling it.
Taking that message then, where do you feel that we seem like we have this conversation over and over and over again, and it seems to come up on a decade type basis. Where do you feel like black filmmakers and black storytellers are able to, I guess not where, but how do you feel like they're able to balance stories for a mass market, but also still tell their own stories? We see this in movies like Hollywood Shuffle, we see it Bamboozled, and most recently with American Fiction. We seemingly have to tell this story over and over again. To your input, I mean, how do you see that balancing out?
It is very, very difficult, right? Because there still is this negotiated tension of, in order to have access to the largest possible audience, there still has to be this almost like permission for access, and access won't be fully granted unless the distributors feel comfortable with the material. And so the more militant material or maybe more incisive material, is just not as seen as marketable, by these power structures. And so that's the tension, right? How do you go about doing something that is subversive, but at the same time that has to be marketable? I mean, if Columbia Pictures, right, or Sony actually doesn't feel as if they can fill 6,000 screens across the nation, why are we even talking about it? Now, mind you, that being said, we're talking about for the mainstream blockbuster level. Now, there are outlets such as Hulu, Netflix that are opening up more outlets. Even people going direct to YouTube. What's the sister's name who got the TikTok saga going on, right? She's been telling her story about why that mayor. Okay, so I think that's opening up, avenues, and when you look at like Aquafina, she's a woman of color, or even Issa Rae, a woman of color, they were able to get started through YouTube and kind of make their way up. But still, I mean, it's not like the floodgates are opening, right? And so I think, it's very difficult when African Americans or other people of color simply don't own the means of production in this country. I mean, let's think about it. It's just this ironic and interesting dynamic that I don't know if we question enough, but just like, we talk about Bollywood, this is all awesome, and even Nollywood in Nigeria, or even if I go to China, like, you have Chinese cinema, but here as an African American, I am uniquely dependent upon Hollywood to create images that will sell back to me of me. Right? Just like if I go to the library, most books written about African Americans are not written by African Americans, right? So I'm always constantly negotiating how I see myself through the lens of other people. This brother and I were literally just having a coffee trying to reconcile because they attended his local store and he attended one of our talks, talking about how, we needed to understand how blacks, living off the plantation, it was a step up for them to then live on the campus, right? And so, right, this is what he's telling us. And so, and so we're constantly, remember, he's a historian. And so we're constantly having to negotiate, how do we tell our stories for ourselves, without it appearing to be too, militant or whatever the case may be. So in answer to your question, Jason, I don't have the answer right now. It's a very complicated equation, where somebody like, Shonda Rhimes does a Bridgerton where it's nice and complex and mixed. She's criticized for selling out, because it's not black focused enough. And then if it's too black and too strong, the bottom line is that it just may not have, the national audience, right? Unless it's a Marvel-backed movie called Black Panther, right? That's had this built-up audience. But even still, not to be pessimistic, but we could talk about this later, but you saw the movie Black Panther, but I don't know if I saw in the movie Black Power.
Yeah, I want to add, too, that, I think along with that, most things that, I want to watch my language here, right? Because I think words matter, words mean things. But too often when we talk about black cinema, it's almost like white fantasy of what black cinema should be, right? And then I think just something that like Van Peebles said while making this film to Mantan Moreland, right? He said, don't make it too clear that we're saying fuck you. Right, which I like. And so I do, and not to like push back, but I do like how Van Peebles is really trying to subvert those tropes, right? And trying to call attention to them, but at the same time, right, really twist kind of the knife into the audience.
I think that's kind of like what both Dr. G are saying. This is very thin line. Yeah. I think when it comes to like American film, largely it will adhere, it will affirm and confirm white values. And a big part of white values when it comes to race relations is that there has to be a black underclass that is of service, that is not of equality, not equal, not eye to eye. And so though I think he does a great job of attempting to subvert and use these characters, even the name, the Watermelon Man. What the watermelon has like a racial history that has been used to demonize black people and criminalize black people. But does it land? Do the audience, especially when it goes to that mainstream audience, which will be majority white people, will it land? Will they understand the nuances? And as such as Dr. G said, like when you use comedy to do it, like that's why I kind of wrote to me that Dave Chappelle piece, like some of the things that he struggled with his art is like, are you laughing at it or are you laughing with me? When you're laughing with me, are you seeing how absurd this actually is? Like this is real life and these are realities and that we're laughing at it, but do you see like the social commentary under it? And so I think it's that thin line that he has to constantly battle with.
And just to build real quickly 3 points, I think there was an opportunity to maybe explain or to contextualize just what watermelon means. I saw it on the table with the fried chicken, right? But does anybody know like why watermelons are associated with African Americans to begin with? Right? It's like we kind of like know it, but think about it, right? Say for example, you're like Monday, 90 degrees, right? Out in Texas, laboring from sun up to sundown. You're exhausted, and you're parched. watermelon, you can imagine or appreciate, is a very valuable resource because it's what type of based? Water-based type of fruit, right? And not only that, but it's large in size, so it has a communal aspect. It can be shared. It's not just one grape for me, right? One grape for me, Jason, no, and one no for no. The idea is that it can be shared, right? And it's able to provide me with that natural sucrose to keep me going. So this idea that the watermelon in some ways is a sacred, right, a piece for us that has been bastardized, throughout the, mainstream media. And I think that was a missed opportunity in terms of, we say watermelon man, like, well, what does that mean, as opposed to someone walking in with the stereotypical narrative and still walking out with that. And then secondly, just the concept of tanning to begin with. I mean, right, just like we're watching the movie, not even talking, but just, do you go out tanning, my brother?
Nah.
I mean, right. So if you want to ask two real black men in the audience, if we even do tanning at all, it's not even a concept, right? We're already blessed, kissed by the sun. We already have melanin, but just this concept itself, because that was part of the running gag, right? And then that's when he went apeshit and attacked the guy who came into his crib, his domicile. To code switch here, right? To deliver the. So I thought that was interesting. But this idea that when we talk about humor, I'm not saying that satire can never be used, right? And I'm not saying that it can't. But again, I think it's a very delicate line, and I think that very few people have been able to strike that balance. It's tough.
So the watermelon on what becomes a kind of objective correlative for the stereotype, but then also the communal aspect that doesn't get touched upon.
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of building off what Dr. G said, when we look at the history of the watermelon and why it is turned into like this racist trope, after emancipation, a lot of enslaved folks were harvesting watermelon as a cash crop. Yeah. You can sell these things. It was a sign of wealth. It was a sign of status. And so for a lot of white Americans who are now seeing these black people gain this status, how do we take that away from them? We demonize them. We create these caricatures. We create these cartoons that deem black people eating watermelon are now lazy and criminal and all of these different things. And so it is a hugely missed opportunity. And as the poll that just went out, we asked, like, does anyone know what watermelon, like, why is it relevant? No one said anything. And I think that kind of goes to the point of, is it landing as intended, right? Because we can kind of miss the entire joke. So it's like, is the joke on me or is it the joke on you for not getting it?
And the thing is, two quick things that he said that are so very powerful. That's why I hang out, with his brother so often. He's just brilliant, right? So this idea that intent is different from impact. So we're very clear on that. We support Melvin Van Peebles as an artist and what he had to go through and what he did, but intent is different from impact, right? I mean, we can have the best of intentions, but in terms of, if the impact is a different scenario, I think, if you care, then you're curious to hear, well, how did it impact you that way and why? Because for any of my white allies who are listening right now, that can oftentimes happen on a day-to-day basis. This idea of like, oh, well, I didn't mean it, and I didn't mean to say it that way. And so, you spend all this time circling your wheels on intent, but instead, what you should do is park and talk about impact. Okay, so I impacted you. Was that what you're saying? Okay, and then if you care about the individual, then perhaps you'll modify your behavior accordingly, right? So again, it's not about the intent. Many of us have the best of intentions, but the question is impact, right? And so again, I think the intent is to show a film like this, have us think, and the impact, I think right now, is us processing and being honest, right? So again, there's just there's nothing to be ashamed about, and if we disagree, then that's fine. But, I think for me, going back to the watermelon piece, I'm just curious, and I don't know whether the movie would have been as successful if that last glimpse we saw was like the narrative for like the last third or even 2/3 of the film, where, okay, I am going to go out on my own. I am going to exploit this market. We're selling watermelons and we're now millionaires, and we're now flipping the script, and now you work for us, or right. So in other words, there was no fundamental systemic change of the power dynamic, right? In other words, right? Just like you watch the movie The Help. Oh, we loved it. Okay, really? That's great. But if you notice, the beginning scene, they start off in maid outfits, and both of the last scenes on screen, both women, in the movie and made outfits. I don't know what the fuck this is about. I'm supposed to be happy. I'm supposed to pay for this. I'm supposed to pay for this. I'm supposed to pay for this. Meanwhile, the white female has the most complicated character arc. Skeeter, right, is the one who, negotiates with the white male to get the job in the first place, leverages or exploits Abilene for the advice column, writes the book contract, leaves to New York, to do girl power and this, that, and the third, and reconciles with her boyfriend and reconciles with her mom. What is the movie about? Is it about the help, or is it about a white female at the end of the day? So in other words, the intent was good to create a story, and have people come together, even though Catherine Stockett observed the help at her brother's house for the story. Right, is right, and then you send her an email and ask how much the help got paid for her observation, right? But and then in terms of the impact, I'm just telling you again, it's just one black man's comments. But in terms of impact for a movie like The Help or Watermelon Man, these are some of the reasons why perhaps it didn't maybe land, with me. And again, maybe if you wake up black tomorrow, it might land with you differently.
If I could go back, and I appreciate the passion, I don't want to derail, but if I could go back to the stories of the community telling their own stories, and this goes for any community, but specifically because we're having the conversation, is this a conversation that's being held within the black community regarding what stories should be told, how we should be telling these stories? And the reason I mention it, you see things like Spike Lee calling out Tyler Perry, and you get this. I'm very interested, and I apologize if the questions aren't worded properly, but I'm very interested in the conversations that are being had within the black community about the stories that are being told.
I mean, yeah, I would say that they're artists, and they think they're passionate about their work, they're passionate about the art, and they're also critical of each other's art. I think as consumers, we have consumer responsibility on who we choose to support and who we choose to watch. But there's always this contention of, do we center whiteness? Do we center white palatability in my art? Or do I make this to speak to the everyday regular lives of black folks that is not creating this mythical imagination of white people, of who they think black people actually are? Do we talk about, I think Issa Rae does an amazing job with Insecure, and I think that's why it landed so well with so many people in the black community, people, especially people my age, because it talked about they were able to just live their life as people, and them being black and going to some type of strife or some type of racial turmoil wasn't the central point of the story that she was trying to tell. It was just about love and relationships and growing. Whereas some black artists, such as like a Tyler Perry or Spike Lee, they tend on two sides of the same coin. Like, do we center this black struggle? If we do center it, how is it being portrayed? Is it being portrayed as a moment of triumph, or do we have to center whiteness to be focal to the story? So it is a conversation that's being had. It's just not being had in, like, obviously these spaces, right? Sure.
And another guardrail or restriction, Jason, about this conversation, and I appreciate you asking, because the question is, where have I seen this conversation? Where is it taking place? It's largely underground, and one of the reasons why is because of the overarching power structure. Because African Americans are so few in number, right? Wait, what percentage of our nation is African American? 37, right. 40% is usually what I get. How about 13? Right. So ding, 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 that's the whole point. So many people believe, based upon images and this, that, and the third, that African Americans are actually, more populous than what they are because of their strong cultural impact in terms of, music and, other things of that nature and spirit. But the idea is this: because you're talking about such a small community, there is reticence or reluctance to publicly criticize the 2 or 3 people that are out there, doing the same type of thing, right? And so, in the vein of airing dirty laundry, right? Given the fact that there's so few number. I mean, now again, we're talking about a larger number of people. When you have more racial capital, then it becomes more individualized. It's not, Brock representing all of, right? It's just Brock as an individual, right? But because, we can count on one hand, like, how many black female directors are out there with Ava DuVernay, Ava and Ava DuVernay, right? Right, yeah, right. Oh, okay, right. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, right. So it makes okay. So because, right, there's so few, the reticence is why criticize publicly. Although if you know where to look, Jason, you will find whispers about what is Tyler Perry doing, right? Again, in terms of the same thing, complicated. Black producer, black writer, black director, awesome. Studio, power move. What's homeless? Rags and riches. This is awesome. But from a content perspective, I mean, the question is he protected from critique just because he's black, or is it fair game, right? And I think you'll find that there are critiques of Tyler Perry, but there are going to be more nuanced in the vein of protecting what few artists we have that are out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Before it gets too late, I'd like to make sure we have time.
Yeah. I was going to open the floor for
Because you guys have access to these dudes. And some
Yeah.
of us don't.
So anybody have any questions or comments they want to make about the film? Yes.
I have a question. What filmmakers are you looking for? Like, are you hearing things of? Is there anyone you're like keeping your eye on, and you're wanting to see this type of filmmaking? Like, who do you see as being the new rising stars of cinema? Who are you looking for to see in the next film?
I mean, as I mentioned, I don't know. I love Issa Rae. The films that she's done have kind of been okay, but when it comes to like the TV sitcom, I mean, I'm looking forward to what she does in the future. But in regards to film, I don't know. I think we're at an interesting point with black art, with decentralizing whiteness. And so I think a lot of directors now who are trying to break into that mainstream are trying to do so, but on the indie level, they've been there, they've been constantly there. There aren't any emerging new because they've been doing the work in those spaces.
That's very
Can I add a couple directors? Like Gina Prince Bythewood's Love and Basketball, I think is good. Barry Jenkins' Medicine for Melancholy, which I think is a good example of sort of in that kind of Issa Rae vein of people going about their lives. Right? And yes, the fact that they're black is important to their character, but it's not romanticizing that kind of racism or.
Yeah, no, it's tough because as I'm listening to your examples, right, it seems as if, and I think that's what he was saying about the reason why Issa Rae's Insecure series resonated so much in terms of her just being normal, and awkward. But this idea of it's either comedy, like Soul Man, or I get Kevin Hart with the bug eyes and the high pitched screams, almost as if he were a minstrel. Sorry, right? Or I get something so very heavy and serious, like Henrietta Lacks, and right. It's like, I mean, again, I'm just like y'all. Like, it's Friday night. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've been working all week. I want to see some dinosaurs and shit too. You know what I'm saying? Like, seriously, I want to pay and go watch and see Henrietta Lacks and some black people getting disrespected and right in Baltimore. Like, really? Well, Friday night, this is what I want to do. But this is like the choice I have. It's like, wow. So in terms of to your question, I mean, I do like Ryan Coogler and I encourage your brother, but I don't want to just put it on just black directors. I mean, this is like for any director, any writer, this idea of like, how do we start to normalize this idea of diversity? And I think this is something we need to learn because the models we have, I think, there's some that are good, but there are a lot that need to be improved upon, right? That are kitschy. And I think this is like one of the challenges when we're bringing in the youth to a space like this. Okay, well, this is good, but how would you maybe do the scene different, right? Like, how would you put your spin on it? Like, what would be your perspective? Like, how would you potentially improve it? Because right now, I just think we're only going to get better if we practice. And I don't know if we practice applying these principles of diversity. We take the trainings and know not to say the N-word. Oh, okay, great. But beyond that, right, how do we actually practice the implementation in our own daily lives?
Yeah, right.
This is much of a question. It was just an observation. Did you notice that some of the motifs from some of his later films, such as Sweet Sweetback, sort of showed up in this, like the long, very long tracking shot, very wide tracking shots when he was at that landfill that remind me a lot of Sweet Sweetback. I didn't know if you guys noticed any of that. Some of his sort of usual things he'd do in his films.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I was actually sitting to myself wondering like, oh, you know when he first turned black and they're in the bathroom and they were kind of in the doorway, you know, I knew Melvin being Melvin. I was like, oh, he's gonna try to get in a little bit of a, you know, black male, white female, as in terms of like flipping the power dynamic, like you know, in terms of sexually active, and you know, and then he just kissed her on her forehead. I was like, oh, really? That's interesting. So I was surprised by that, but. Lo and behold, now that scene was coming, right? You know, so right, and he did it on the canvas of the proverbial classic, you know, blonde female, not just blonde, but Norway, right? You know that, you know, all dressed in pink, right? Not orange or brown, right? You know, so I think that was deliberate. This idea of conquest. Now again, I don't believe women should be conquested or conquered, and I don't think he should have lost his family and all that. But I think him in terms of being subversive, I definitely was like looking for that and then saw that.
I mean, there's even some of the like warm melancholy that you see in 3 Day Pass too, right? In this one, yeah. Shasta, did you?
Oh, I was just gonna say that the one thing that stood out for me was the wife and how at the beginning she's like very like pro, like she's against the like she thinks the riots make sense, and then you see that her white, like her not her whiteness, her like equality has a stop.
Yeah.
You're right.
She's like, oh, well, I'm not that equal.
Yeah.
Same with the boss when you're like, oh, he's cool, you know, he's cool with it. Like, oh, he's gonna keep his job, and he's like, you can help the black neighborhood, and if you give them insurance, then they won't be a debt to society or whatever. And you're like, oh, you're like, you know, like, and I thought that dynamic was interesting, how they were showing that there's white people who think that they are all for equality, and then they have their limits.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of, if I can say like some of the strong points of the movie is just his ability to showcase the fickleness of white liberals who think they are on the right side of things, but it comes to a certain extent. Like her connection or her proximity to blackness was always through the TV screen, right? And so from that, she was safe to say like, oh, this is interesting to watch, or Jeff, we should pay attention to this thing, where he has the more absurd approach, where like, I don't want to watch that. I don't want to watch these uppity darkies jigging across, or sticking this elevator up and we're going to Harlem. Like, he's so absurd to the point that people around him are not even saying anything, right? Whereas once she's confronted with his blackness, when he magically turns black, this is when all of her deep-rooted racism actually comes out. Oh, hide the money, or I thought you were going to kill me, or all of these things, or, you know, I heard this is popular in Africa, right? All these, and I think that what he's doing is just showing that even for white liberals who think that they have this level of wokeness and they believe that black people are equal, like once you hit a certain point, like underneath the racism is going to come out, the anti-blackness is going to come out. And I took note of that. I watched the movie and I just focused on the movie, and then I watched it again just to see like how other people around Jeff were kind of interacting with him in his transition. And that was something that constantly came up, was how these white liberals were either silent in his absurdity or kind of affirmed what he said in their own way once confronted when he turned black, once their proximity was now disrupted. And I think we see a lot of that even in today's society. Once proximity is disrupted and things hit the fan, like, where do you really stand when it comes to these race relation things?
I think I saw it in The Wife as soon as they started calling her house.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's when it was like, it's
Yeah.
my space now.
Yeah.
That's when she started acting different.
Well, if you pay attention, she actually does it very early on. As soon as she comes out the shower, she's like, "Oh, I thought you were gonna kill us. Like, call the police." And he says, "Like, well, if I was a white guy, you would have humped me, right?" Like, we all laughed at it, but I think even that subtle joke, he's pointing to like, you didn't feel safe because you were in close. This was your first time to what we see as audience. You have close proximity to a black man, and the immediate thought process was sex or violence or theft or some type of criminality now that you're in close proximity. So to me, it's like the first 20 minutes she exposes it. It's because it's disrupted for her.
To like add to that though, and what you're saying, even in the sense that, going back to what y'all were saying about he got the script and he's splitting stuff, and kind of how does he do the fuck you while also getting his point across, is if you listen to the language used by the wife, definitely influenced by, I'm gonna say her last name wrong, but Betty
Friedan.
Right.
she's definitely influenced by her.
which in real life, that he was being held accountable by black women who were, you're not for us, you're not about us in the reality. And then with his doctor, and he's like, oh, I hope to see you around. And then he says, yeah, I'll see you here, implying, because at that time, right, how people fit, like name and how he looked, both of us, you're Jewish, I'm black, we're not getting into this club that I'm telling you we're going to see each other at. And so those little points of realization that happen throughout are also kind of going back to what y'all were saying, that point of how does he get this across, but what is missed by the audience and what is captured by those who are taking it in.
And this is where I think that if we are honest with ourselves and self-aware as, say, self-identifying white allies, this is where we have a conversation with ourselves. This is where we sit and go, oh shit, have I done that? Have I been in that situation? How would I act, right? But again, that needs a level of self-awareness, right? Or are we laughing with or at, right?
Well, and I think too, it's you see a lot of his peers and the people around him accepting at first, but when they realize it's a permanent thing, then it starts to turn, right? Then it starts to become more of a problem. So they're respective to a degree, and then as it gets to be a more of a day-to-day thing, then it's the stares come, and it's much more uncomfortable. And he actually has to then he has to retreat.
Yeah, and I think the line delivered was, I'm liberal, but up until a point, right? And I think in terms of, what did work, I think Melvin absolutely should be applauded for subverting Columbia by not doing the whole Scrooge, now I understand, now I see, because that's the whole point. When every Halloween, we have to remind, students, that culture is not a costume. So, I mean, even beyond Halloween, just a couple weeks ago at the Super Bowl, did you all see how many people in the stands were wearing Native American headdresses, right? And this is at the Super Bowl. It's nothing to do with Halloween. We're just celebrating our sport, so to speak. But just this idea but guess what? At the end of the game, you can take the headdress off, right? But for someone who truly is, say, the Wichita, indigenous from around here, you can't take that off, right? After a 3-hour football game, like that is your life. That's the issue, and that constant maintenance, like you said, of like once it was more than just temporal. This was not just on my screen, but it's actually in my home, and the phone calls interrupting my space. People are coming over. Now I'm starting to see the reaction. Again, the first thing was to extricate the kids, and then eventually myself, right? This idea of distance. And I think you're right in terms of the complication could have been nuanced a little bit more, because white women oftentimes do see themselves as rightfully so, victims of subjugation in contrast to white males, but then fail to see to what degree that black women are subjugated according to them, right? Let's not forget how even during the Depression, right? Poor white women still had what? Black women working for them. Right? You look it up. The WPA was paying black women to actually work for poor white women, right? Who couldn't do the laundry, during those times, right? But they still were able to pay a black woman to do it during the Depression. So there's this hierarchy, right? That I think still needs to be teased, because you're right. When we talk about allyship, I think we have to be honest about the limitations, and it's not to say it's somebody's fault. Well, it is the fault of maybe our education system, right? When we don't have meaningful conversations like this earlier and more often, right? Because again, for someone to walk out of here and be like, oh, well, I didn't know the watermelon. Well, that's good, right? That's good for you to learn that. The key would have been for you to learn that maybe in 3rd grade, like when we did.
Speaking to the education system, he just brought up a good point that I didn't want to miss, is that the kids being, not necessarily central to the story, but when they see their dad, they don't think anything's wrong, right? And so I think he's getting at this idea that racism is like a taught thing. Like it is a learned behavior observed by social surroundings, as opposed to being inherent to our nature. And I think it's, again, one of those points that like, you missed it if you missed it, right? You missed it if you missed it, but it's there, it's subtle. Like the kids, they see their father and they're like, oh, Dad, like, what's wrong with you? Right. To them, it's everyday life. Like, they don't necessarily see him the way in which his wife sees him now, or the people that he had everyday interactions with now see him as this black man.
And contrasting that with, I thought was also interesting was the scene where the men were in the home negotiating, because what struck me about that was how polite they were, right? I mean, again, no one called anyone the N-word. There's no finger pointing or anything of that nature. But at the same time, Jeff won the battle, right? He got $100,000, right? But what did they originally offer him? So I thought that was telling this idea that, which was still a significant amount, right? And it seems as if he was like absurdly pushing the number, right? But even in negotiating a potentially flawed transaction, I mean, the idea that we're going to pay you to go away in the first place, right? You know, the idea behind that. But even still, they lowballed him, so to speak, because I think the language was very specific about, well, I was authorized only to, this is my max. So it's kind of like when you go to the table with an insurance company and they're like, oh, well, we can't pay you. They're like, you pay the max, you have it. Like, why are we playing this game? We're wasting time. So this idea that he had the max, but just in terms of, even still, I'm devaluing you, right? Whereas with the kids, they just saw dad. I thought that was a nice contrast.
And all of that like reinforces this systemic issue, right? And the sort of system of structures built around that and working within those structures, right? Which, yeah, I mean, maybe Van Peebles is calling attention to, maybe not as much as he should, right?
I just want to say that for me, it was hard to watch. Like, the movie was really hard to watch.
Yeah.
But it had moments that I thought were powerful, right? Just weren't explored as much. But the scene that kind of hit me was when he started running. Like, the first time he ran as a black man, and then he encountered all of that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then it was just really sad to see him just sit at the bus stop, knowing that, you know, like, I can't really run, right? Like, I can no longer run. He had the freedom to run, like, without being disturbed as a white man, but then he encountered the reality as a black man, and now he no longer runs. And that made me think of, like, a conversation I was having with my mom. We're Puerto Rican, and we were talking about, you know, race, and how hard it is for her to live here and not Puerto Rico, because, well, in Puerto Rico, you feel Puerto Rican, you know? But in the U.S., you don't think, like, I don't think of myself as what she said. I don't think of myself as Puerto Rican. I think of myself as me, and I happen to be Puerto Rican, but then you're met with people that treat you.
Yeah.
You are this.
Yeah.
And so I guess that scene made me think about that, and, like, how powerful, like, specificity in movies is universal, and that's something that I want to see when it comes to, like, stories that are not necessarily white-centered. It's just, like, it doesn't have to be about my race or my experience as a woman. Like, I want more stories about just mediocre women. You know what I mean? Like, just, you know, just human beings, you know? So that made me think about that.
Is there a portion of that we are concerned with where we want stories to just be stories, but do we lose anything in that telling? Does that make sense? Like, where there's an import to telling black stories, right? But we also want to have stories that exist, and I'm not saying that they can't coexist, but where do we draw the line with those? I guess, how do we make sure we're paying service to both of those?
Yeah, no, I think it's difficult, Jason, because this, what she was just talking about, this has been 400 years in the making, right? It has. I mean, because like you said, you're here just, you know, minding your business, but people, they kind of force you. I mean, you know, wait, so what are you again? Wait, where are you? I mean, right. Wait, where are you really? Right, you know, and again, it's not necessarily welcoming, like, oh, you know, like, you know, I like mofongo too, or, you know, but it's more like, you know, but do you speak Spanish, and, you know, are you like, they're trying, right. And so Jason, to your point, I mean, I think that what's difficult is when a movie like The Color Purple, the musical, comes out, I think there's a disproportionate amount of pressure on a movie like that, right? To be successful and to represent so many things for so many people. And what we were saying earlier is that that I think, going back to what you're saying about the idea of running, I think the ideal scenario would be where Mr. Perkins represents Mr. Perkins, not necessarily the whole of the black race in terms of everything that he does. And so, I think that when you look at, black artists that are creating, there's still this inordinate amount of pressure about, does it does it truly represent like this story for this monolithic block? And guess what, y'all? We're gonna find out again this November. Black people do not vote in a monolithic block, right? It's amazing. Like, black people have different ideas and opinions, right? Believe it or not, right? Believe it or not, right? And again, I went to HBCU, so I know, right? I was able to see different people, all different shades and types and ideas. It was amazing, right? You should try it. So, yeah, absolutely. And so the idea is that, Jason, I think right now the way the Hollywood system is structured, that pressure I think is still going to be there. I mean, I don't want to wish it away and be idealistic. I think that's just a factor right now, and that might change in generations to come. The more that we have discussions like this, and more writers and directors are more sensitive, because those are the keys. We talk about an increase in actors, right? And Hollywood has changed, absolutely. Hands down, I cannot quibble about that. We are seeing much more diversity on screen, right? But people, while that's cool, in addition to the quantity, there's 2 Latinos on screen. There's 3 Native, Killer Flower Moon, there's 3 Native Americans speaking lines. Okay, so in addition to the quantity, I want us also to look at the what? The quality. Because the Killer Flower Moon, the Native Americans survive, right? It's 3.5 hours. You think they have a chance, right? So in terms of quality, right? Quality. So I think right now, Jason, the pressures of Hollywood make it very difficult for upcoming artists of color to be individualistic. I think these other attendant pressures are part of the package right now. Okay, so it wasn't just me.
But then I heard you say, I get that the intent was there, but I ain't feeling it, and that's also good for me to hear, that it made me uncomfortable, but it's still not hitting the mark. I think that's important, and one of the first things you talked about was the watermelon, and I was cringed to say it out loud, but what I thought was, because we used to garden a lot, and we did a lot of heirloom vegetables, and the watermelon varieties that we got that were heirlooms, non-hybrid, were native to Africa.
Oh wow! You said non-hybrid.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, sir. The heirloom seeds that we had were native to Africa. The watermelons that we grew, and I cringed and couldn't say it out loud because I was so embarrassed to be white for the next several days, but especially in those few minutes. But anyway, so I wondered if there was anything to why that is associated with that. And you don't have to answer that.
The concept of watermelon?
The main point was that I couldn't say it because I was cringing because of what I just seen, and I don't know whether there's any relevance. Does anybody else?
So,
I can't speak to that, but I can piggyback on what you said. I think Hollywood can take some notes from social media, and valuing authenticity is a huge deal. That's why Risa Tisa has been so popular on TikTok, because that was just an authentic story. Race was not centered. It was just her story that has been relatable globally. And that's what we need to get to, without that shield of the Hollywood perspective and trying to make everyone, because it's different now. The world has shifted. And I feel like we're all ready to embrace everyone's authentic self. And so if we can end it, if that is a good way for Hollywood to get over these obstacles, I think authenticity is it.
And I agree. I think Hollywood is still in the imagination of white folks, largely. And I think when we call it Hollywood, we kind of passively miss that point, right? And I know exactly what you're saying. But I think when we say Hollywood is doing this thing, it's like we're kind of passive and not direct to saying, like, when it comes to this movie industry, it is in the imaginations of like white folks, of like what they want to see or what they believe to be true for Black populations or indigenous populations or like we're not there yet. And honestly, I don't know how we get there. This concept of race and Blackness, racism is really baked into the fabric of this country. I mean, enslavement existed long before the United States was the United States. So anything that comes after that is like sugar in an apple pie. Like, it is baked into the fabric. I don't know how you take it out of it. And it kind of intersects itself into all of our interactions, whether visibly or blindly or just, and I think it gets its most power when it becomes invisible. Again, bringing it back to the film, I think his attempt, which doesn't land, is to kind of take those invisible pieces and bring it to the forefront. Like, some of the things that come to my mind is like when the bus driver and Joe at the counter find out he's Black, they're like, oh, I didn't know you were Black. Well, let me give you some instructions on like how to navigate this space, right? And to me, it reminded me of Paul Laurence Dunbar's The Mask We Wear. Like, they're now taking off the mask to like give their authentic selves, but even then, he still has this dissonance of like, I'm not Black, like that's not me. But they're like, sure, you're not Black, but here are some instructions on how to like navigate this space. Because we're still operating within this larger system that no matter how good you look, no matter how good your job is, no matter how well you speak, no matter how conservative your suits are, even if you see the suits are like blue and conservative, but towards the end, they're like more vibrant in color, they're more, right? And so no matter what you drive and what, like, we're still operating within this system. So I don't know how much we change it by adhering to it.
And there's even this aspect that I think we try to make the implicit explicit, or we keep trying and it just doesn't seem to land. And I think that's kind of what Van Peebles is trying to do, right? Is make those implicit things explicit, even with the notion of, or the hint of passing, I think, in the film too.
You know, and when you say we, let's break down the numbers. When we say Hollywood, what percentage of the Writers Guild of America is white? Anybody know? Remember, these are the people responsible for bringing us to life, all these beautiful stories. Exactly. So 90%. Directors Guild of America.
It's going to be higher.
Yes, even higher. It's a 98. And mind you, of that 2%, that includes television, commercial, and non-feature film, right? So when you talk about how many people are actually producing the big-time summer tentpole blockbusters that we all know and love that are distributed worldwide, very small group, right? And so it's not to say these people are evil. These are well-educated people who love art, but I think some of these movie scripts might look different if more people like you and I were in that room. And like, well, actually, I don't know about that, right? You know, that's and that back and forth. When you talk about being authentic, the idea that you know, because you know, we have a growing relationship, right? I'm able to sit here and be like, hey, man, you know, this is what I'm thinking. I'm honest about it. For them to be, you know, okay. So it's not the, you know, put on blast, like, why did you show this movie? No. That's the point, to show this movie for us to think about, okay, well, what parts work? Because remember, I thought I was very clear, and I said, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's be complicated. There are parts that were good, but overall, it didn't land, right? And here's some of the reasons why, right? You know, and then that's what we're able to dialogue back and forth about. Then she's able to say, well, here's me being authentic, and that's how we're able to build. That's how we're able to build relationships and build community, right? But I think in terms of right now, we're at a disadvantage in terms of when we go to the AMC 18, there's very little voting in terms of what's actually shown to us. The most voting power we have is essentially whether to patronize it or not. But I still believe that these conversations are still planting the seeds for what will be generated and created, in hopefully the days to come.
Kind of running out of time, so last thoughts, Will?
I really think that this should be played back to back with Sweetback. I feel like this was made for a white liberal audience. The protagonist is white. And did Melvin, was that his intent? Because Sweetback is a clear answer to this movie.
Well, I mean, so, off this film, he was offered a 3-picture contract with Columbia and said, right? Gave him the finger and went off with his own money and a loan from Cosby to go make Sweetback, right? And so, I mean, yeah, he's like, I'll do it myself and I'll make this the biggest badass independent film that's around. I mean, it was the highest grossing independent film of 1970-71. And it maintained that for a long, long time, right? So, I mean, I think, and I agree. I mean, watching Sweetback after this, you're just like, oh, I see how he's taking some of those ideas and just boom, right? Blowing it up to make then this film that becomes, a film sort of lionized by the Black Panthers after that as well.
Well, and to even Will's point, the films, like you said, they almost run together, right? Because as he's in the bar at the end, you see the cops coming in, accosting a patron who's doing nothing other than just being in the bar, which is actually the start and the impetus of Sweetback, and him going on the run. So, yeah, it does seem like this could just roll right into Badass Song.
And the kind of like militancy of the end with broomsticks and whatever they have, right, to sort of fight back.
Yes, Elizabeth.
To go back to the idea of authenticity, that was actually the thing that came across the most strong for me was his life as a white man was so full of frenetic emptiness, like this pointless running after the bus, this tanning, this posturing at work, even though he's failing at work apparently. Like all of that emptiness just sort of kind of eventually does drop away by the end of the movie, although it is to your point, like I think you're right, it's a missed opportunity that he's now living maybe a more authentic life without all this posturing, but it's not a successful life. It's still within the constraints of systemically racist environment.
Yeah, and I think that's the way the movie ends is kind of like, well, is it authentic? Like, is he a black man now? I think the movie ends as bizarre as it kind of starts. He magically turns black one day, and then towards the end of the movie, he's now this black revolutionary militant. Do we buy that? Does it land? Like, to me, I didn't really get the character arc. I didn't accept it of like, okay, now you're a black man, welcome to the party. But it's more so more questions than answers. And to your point, I do think it kind of builds off this idea. And I think for me, it's this, when you're not having to operate within this system, like this Watermelon Man is under Columbia, so he's adhering to like certain type of parameters. There's a certain audience that he knows that this movie has to go to. But when he goes back to the indie route where I have more control, I am the one funding my own project, then these ideas that I'm working with can be expounded upon. They can be relayed in a way that makes sense for me and my like directed audience without centering white palatability.
Last thoughts from you guys, and I want to thank you both for being here. It's been wonderful. So.
Been an enriching, lively conversation.
Then I know it's pretty late. It's past a lot of people's bedtime. It's definitely past my bedtime. But I do want to thank you all for the opportunity, for having us out here, Devin for connecting, as well as you all coming out tonight. These conversations are important. We're able to kind of think, and I think what art does, it makes us think and it makes us feel. It allows us to kind of take away something, whether you get it, whether you don't get it, whether we agree, whether we disagree, who cares? But I think if it does what it's supposed to do in any regard, it should make you think critically, like of ourselves and our relationships to others. And so I don't know if you all got all of the movie. You might have to watch it again. I probably won't. But for the sake of this conversation, I do thank you all for coming out tonight, and I enjoyed the conversation. Yeah.
I also would like to echo my gratitude for all of yous staying up to hang out. No, seriously, I mean, I wish I had as much luck at my dinner table. Right, but no, seriously, the open invitation, Jason, Brock, my brother, thanks for thinking about me. And I'm just also appreciative of all of yous being willing to engage in conversation. I mean, I think this is what warms my heart as I drive home, tonight. Even though I thought it was 90 degrees on Monday, in this chilly 40-degree air. What warms me is this idea that these are the seeds, not watermelon seeds, but these are the seeds of community, right? For us to exchange ideas, exchange different points of view. And it's not a matter of us all holding hands and singing Kumbaya walking out the theater. That's not the point. The point is that we can appreciate intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, that we can see the same thing, but not see the same thing. Right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So I just want to encourage you to keep watching what you're watching.
That's how we're supposed to talk about it.
Yeah. All right, everyone, thank you. Give these guys a round of applause, please. Yeah, thank you. And you guys be safe going home. We'll be back here at the end of March with She Dares Collective to watch Emma Seligman's Bottoms. It is a great film, so I hope you guys all come back out for that.
Ain't you? Where can I be? This ain't America, is it? Oh Lord, where can I be? This ain't America, is it? No, this ain't America. You can't fool me. This here's the home of the sheriff, not the land of the free. In America, folks don't run through the streets, blood streaming from where they've been beat. And the parks are for the people. And the cops in the good old USA.
You have been listening to Why Does the Wilhelm Scream with your hosts, Brock and Jason. If you liked today's episode, do us a favor and rate, review, and subscribe in whatever application you use to consume podcasts these days. You can reach us by visiting whydoesthewilhelmscream.com. If you are in the DFW area, we would love to see you at a Fort Worth Film Club event. You can learn more about those and find a full schedule at fortworthfilmclub.com. And you can learn about my foundation and how we are trying to foster the next generation of film lovers at realhousefoundation.org. That's REEL housefoundation.org. Till next time.